Hi, and welcome to The Chronic Report. I'm Nicole Stewart-Selleck, and I am joined today with my co-host, Dr. Patrick Lynch. Good afternoon, Patrick. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Pretty good so far.
Yeah, you and I have been looking forward to today's episode for
Yeah.
quite a while. We are honored to host today Sam Coffman. He's a former Army Special Forces medic, and he's also the founder and director of The Human Path, where he teaches botanical medicine, Western pathophysiology, physiology, integrative medicine, austere, and post-disaster medicine. He has taught herbalism for over 30 years and has been a clinical herbalist for over 25 years. He is also the co-founder of Herbal Medics, which brings medicine for Indigenous local residents in remote areas. This organization has assisted with first aid and herbal first aid support at numerous gatherings and protests, as well as post-disaster medical and botanical medicine clinics along the Texas coastline and in Houston during Hurricane Harvey. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your life and how you got into herbalism?
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of a story that I suppose started back in childhood. I grew up in a fairly plant literate family, I would say.
Nice.
We gardened all of our food, not all of it, but a good part of our food for the winter. And so gardening was a big part of what we did, and canning and preserving and so forth. And I remember my mother teaching me at an early age, as early as I can remember, 4 or 5 maybe, that the plants that she talked to did better. And I remember talking to plants back at that age. So I was very connected to the plant world, I think, at an early age.
Yes.
Getting into medicine, I was in the military. I went in the Army right out of high school, but I wanted to learn languages. I was into languages, and I became an interrogator, and I worked at that time on the east-west German border in northern Bavaria as what's called I was an interrogator, but it's basically human intelligence gathering, which was incredible experience for me, but nothing to do with medicine. And I got out, got an undergrad degree in linguistics, and then decided I wanted to come back into the military. And I was really pulled toward medicine at that time. And I kind of had a choice between back in the military or maybe going into Chinese medicine, TCM. But I really wanted emergency medicine, allopathic, emergency medicine, field medicine. I felt like that was where I needed as a basis. And that honestly is an incredible course for that. So I went to the military, got into, through selection and all that, and made it through the QC and became a Green Beret or a Special Forces medic. But all through that time, I was already very, I think, close to herbal medicine. I was reaching out at, that was way before the internet, but doing things like distance courses in the old school naturopathy, which was, I would never put that on a resume or anything, but I learned some real basic stuff at least.
Yeah.
And even used it, in the QC when I broke my thumb in the middle of GOAT lab or at the start of GOAT lab in the medical portion, and used herbalism, when I should have had an open reduction, internal fixation. By all, standards of allopathic care, I should have been unable to continue, with very, very strenuous, hand and grip, doing cricothyroidotomies every day on the goats and all the stuff they had to do. Herbs got me through that, specifically 2 herbs, comfrey and horsetail, and poulticing those. And I, at that time, probably only had a materia medica of 20 or 25 herbs. I didn't know much, but I did know a little bit. And then even from that, going into teams and carrying herbs in the field in my med pack, I'd have, you're carrying 100 pounds on your back, and probably 35 pounds at least of that is your medical pack. And I probably had another, 5 pounds, maybe 3 pounds, something like that of herbs. I had this old kind of retrofitted, I found out later it was a fly tying kit. It was just something that the supply sergeant was throwing out. And I used that for my herbs and honeys and some different stuff that I put in there. And I found myself using that a lot for myself, kept me healthy, kept me from getting sick in the field, when you're cold and tired and wet for 2 weeks straight and sleeping in, sleeping in mud puddles, basically in the middle of the woods and stuff. And then a lot of teammates, started coming to me and finding out, well, how is it that this, they would see this working in family members. And it was something I never, let anybody really know. Our medical director was very conservative allopath and probably I would have gotten chewed out for even considering herbs back then. And this was back in the early 90s, late 80s.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where the kind of the empirical, value of it was very apparent. The practical value of it was very apparent even for teammates, seeing, wow, this stuff really works and it's preventative. And so I think through that, just continually trying to integrate those two worlds of field medicine, austere medicine, allopathic care, of course, where necessary, and integrating that with herbal, with botanical medicine specifically. And now, it would be considered, and this is our whole program at Herbal Medic's Academy, aka the Human Path, is our austere program. And I founded that and run that together with an MD who also started as a Green Beret medic 10 years before I did, and then went to med school and he's been a rural doc for, going on 30 years now, or maybe even more. And so the two of us created this austere, kind of program to be able to integrate these two worlds. And now the term is, basically prolonged field care, as the kind of special forces medicine goes back towards that. But it's really austere medicine is what we called it back then. And it's the same thing. It's the idea of sustainable care. And so, of course, we teach, wilderness first aid and first responder certification. But then all of that is, packaging and, basically taking care of somebody and making sure they don't get any worse and getting them to higher care. But then we start the question, what if there is no higher care? Where do we go from here? And so that's kind of been a hallmark, something that's our own niche in the school that nobody else in the world does. Of course, we do clinical herbalism programs and advanced medicine making, and even family medicine and doula certification and, emergency birth and things like that with our midwife herbalist, Katia Lamone. But really our big thing that nobody else does, and that's just kind of stuck with us as what we do, is austere medicine.
Sam, I read the story about the goats and the broken thumb in your book, Herbal Medic. I thoroughly enjoy this book. I highly recommend it, by the way, to all our viewers. It's like a combination of the SAS guidebook, survival guidebook for the military, and in like a materia medica of herbals. And it's amazing. I really love this book. But, in the intro, you have this great story. And I think it's real important. You kind of glossed over the thing about the goats, but I think this is kind of a poignant story. Talk about the accident that you had and how you really got to see firsthand the power of the herbs that you were knowledgeable about.
Sure. Well, at that time, the medic portion, which was the first year, was called phase 1 back then of the Special Forces qualification course. Once you got through selection, you went to that. And that first year, about the first 7 months of it was called the 300F1 course, which was more didactic. And then, you got your EMT and all that stuff. But then there's a lot of just kind of role play. It was all, moulage and, fake blood. And then after you did a 1 month clinical at an emergency room, then you go to what's called Goat Lab, or what was called Goat Lab, or Med Lab. And that was where the blood was real, And you're not allowed to use the word goat. Those are your patients. And you have short-term, you have long-term patients, you have, emergency. And so at the time I went, there was about a week downtime before we started. And so I went mountain biking with a friend who was already stationed down there, and went over a jump and landed in the sand. I was used to Colorado, rocky trails, and landed in the sand and went flying because it didn't go any further, and had a fallen outstretched hand injury. And I heard it pop. I was in denial, but I heard the pop was an avulsion fracture in my left thumb. And so I went and we had the x-ray machine at Goat Lab, and I x-rayed it myself, and it's like, oh yeah, you could see it plain as day. So I went up to the hospital, and, the orthopod that saw me was like, I think he was a major, I believe, or captain, but he's like, yeah, no big deal. We'll give you a medical recycle, and, in 3 months, you'll be ready to go. We'll give you an open reduction, internal fixation. That's the only way this is going to heal. You can't, if you don't do that, you're never going to have grip strength again, blah, blah, blah. And I talked him out of it. And he was not happy, basically. I talked him into putting a cast on it, and he said, you're an idiot. And the reason I did that was because I couldn't take another 3 months in that course. And not because I couldn't take another 3 months, but I was trying to be a dad. I had a child, a son. My son was 3 years old. I'd missed his life for at least a year. And I was like, man, I'm either getting through this in one shot, or I'm not getting through it all. And at that time of just that medical course, we started with 83. And of those of us who made it through in one shot, there was 13 of us. So, it was a high attrition course, right? And it's highly sleep deprived. And it's a very intense, it's very intense medicine, 7 days a week, and it's like a cross between kind of meatball nurse practitioner, I would say autonomous nurse practitioner, and combat paramedic kind of mixed into one is how I would now kind of classify what we
Sure.
learned. But so I lucked out, and I ended up in the half of the class that got microscopy for the first 4 weeks. So that gave me 4 weeks to heal that, and I basically went to town. So I got the cast. He kicked me out and told me, he's like, get the hell out of here. If I see you back here again, you're going to get an Article 15 for disobeying a direct order. Get your cast and get out of my life. You're never going to have grip strength. You're going to, it's your life. Mess it up all you want, soldier. So I went down to the barracks and cut the cast off and got a ride to town because I knew there was this little kind of new agey shop there, and they sold some herbs there. And I'd been there already. I checked it out, and I knew they had some herbs. They, they had maybe 20 herbs there or something, but I knew they had comfrey. I knew they had horsetail, and I knew those two. And I knew a lot about them at that time already. So I bought an ounce of each, about a pound of each of those, and brought them back to the barracks and hid them under the locker. I was scared to death they were going to think I was hiding pot. That I was going to get busted for weed. And then I made a bunch of little Ziploc baggies, with 4x4 gauze, and I'd make these poultices, and then I'd carry about, 5 or 6 of those around with me every day in my cargo pocket, and I would just go to the bathroom, and about every 2 or 3 hours, I'd switch it out. I'd put it under just tap water, and put it on there, and then bind it up with an ace wrap. And it was my left hand, and I had about 4 weeks, like I say, of microscopy, and then until I really had to use that kung fu grip to pull up a trachea and get a cricothyroidotomy every day. You're doing that with the goats. They give them an airway, breathing, circulation, and they put gloves down their throat and nose, and they'll pop a couple of holes in the chest with a scalpel, and they'll maybe give you a mesenteric artery or something. I mean, they will just, it's brutal.
Yeah.
Brutal. And of course, they're fully anesthetized, but it's a brutal course. And and of course, there's lots of distractions, and they're messing with you the whole time, and might be spraying you down with high power water nozzles while you're breathing, and smoke, burning hay bales, and gunfire going on. Of course, not live rounds in the training, but so it's very highly intense training. And my thumb would ache, for a couple hours after every time I did that in the emergency, the first 6 weeks of emergency before you get in doing more long-term stuff. But it made it. And I mean, to this day, I've never had any arthritis. I have a little bump there. There's probably a calcium deposit. I've never had, I had full grip strength within a couple of months. It was fine. And that was kind of my trial by fire with herbal medicine. It was like, well, and that's kind of how I've always been my whole life. It's like, well, show me the money, show me, does this really work? Well, that was my chance to say, yeah, it really works. And so from then on, I was completely 100% dedicated.
What was the reaction of your superiors? I mean, I'm sure, well, when I read the story, I got the idea that they didn't think you were going to recover. So were they pretty stunned, and were they wondering how did this happen?
They didn't care, that it's SF is a strange little thing, man. It's like, until you've made it through, you're kind of like a lower class human. It's so different than some of the other, at least at that time. I compare it to back, we used to train with Navy SEALs a little bit out in Coronado. And one time we went out there, and there was what they call a class off party where the next BUDS class was starting. And there were a bunch of Navy SEALs, instructors standing around. We were just, drinking beer, kind of hanging out and stuff. And there was a band playing, and there was like a bikini contest. There was all this stuff going on. Then, it's like, oh my God, and SF and Green Berets, it would never, you're just like, you're garbage until you've made it through from the beginning to the end. And they were talking about it. And one of the guys was like, one of the instructors was like, yeah, hey, the drummer is in the BUDS class. He's going to be one of our BUDS students. And they're all like, what? He's the best musician up there too. And I was just thinking, oh my God, if this was SF, it'd be like, oh, looks like we've got a band fag. What's his name? We'll watch for him, like that. Yeah. It's just a totally different attitude. So when I came in, I had to fill a report out about the injury. And I heard the NCOIC in there reading it, and I was really a smart ass, and I put, because this whole report that you had to fill out at that time was like, who's at fault for this injury, and I put, operator of the, I wrote it in like this technical jargon of like, operator of the mountain bike assembly failed to take in account the effects of earthly gravity and such, and I heard him in there in his office reading it and saying, what the hell? You're laughing, and he's like, well, we'll see, they're just like, let's see. Can he make it or not? Whatever, and they knew that I'd cut off the cast. They knew that because I had to have an actual medical report. So they were just like, well, if he makes it through, then he's SF material. If he doesn't, well, bye, So that was kind of the attitude.
Wow.
And you made it through.
I did. Yeah, I made it
You
through.
made it
First,
through, and how long were you in for?
a total of 6 years, if you count. I came in '89 and I left in '95. So
You were part of the teams for 6 years?
that's correct. Yeah. So
Yeah.
most of what I did was recon, honestly. And then
Yeah.
there were a lot of training, what we would call FID, like Foreign Internal Defense Mission training, but it was like SWAT teams for like DEA. And I was
Okay.
on the drug interdiction team, but it was mostly everything I did was pretty much recon. That
Okay.
was
What
back.
years?
We weren't in a big war back then.
Yeah.
Right. What years did this take place? These 6 years?
Well, what year? When '89 to '95?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and then when I came in was when Desert Shield started, but
Right.
it was over before I got done with the Q course, and so
Okay.
yeah, we were all thinking, oh man, we're going to get done with the Q course and we're going straight over to,
Yeah.
straight over there, but it was
Wow.
already over.
Yeah. Yeah.
So did you witness the curtain coming down? Were you there
No,
during that
I
time?
left there in '86. So yeah, it's
Okay.
'82 to '86 in Germany, and yeah, I think
Okay.
'89 is when the wall came down. So it was still, it was still pretty hot zone over there. I mean, there was, there were minor skirmishes over there. There were definitely, it would fly once in a while. Most of the people that I would talk to, and it would debrief basically, were what were called termed IBCs or illegal border crossers, but they were almost always people that were in the military, in the East German military, because those are the only people allowed close enough to the border to be able to get across. The border, is a huge, like 5 kilometer deep fortified zone with mines and, mines on the fences, shotgun mines and, guard towers and dogs. So every once in a while, about every 2 to 3 months, there'd be somebody that managed to be on patrol or whatever and managed to break away. And sometimes they'd get shot at, and sometimes we did a lot of recon on the border as well. But it was mostly it was debriefing, and of course West Germany accepted anybody coming over as an IBC was immediately given West German citizenship, so they recognized that. But we would, as Americans, it was a civilian closed job, and it was amazing because I was working with guys who were 10 to 15 years older than me, Vietnam vets, people that had a lot of experience, and I was just this 19-year-old kid, and I didn't speak. I had a knack for languages. I went to DLI first, and within a year and a half, I lived with my German girl. I didn't speak a word of English for 3.5 years, and I was fluent. I was native fluent within a year of being over there. Like where if somebody recognized I was American, I would be so upset. I'd go home and I would read out loud, I'd do whatever for like 2 hours and be like, oh my God, how could I make that mistake, or whatever. So I was very, I was very into being a native speaker, and I was at the time, not now, but at the time I was. And so it was very much kind of a liaison job with functionaries, with the Bavarian Border Police and the Bundesgrenzschutz and the police and all that.
So, Sam, you were a medic as a part of the teams. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And so what kind of injuries and what kind of situations did you encounter where herbs came into play and they had a significant part of the process of helping someone get to a better place?
In the military, almost none. And any that I would,
Okay.
It was more like on the far side.
Gotcha.
Any major injuries that I was on, I wasn't in deep battle. I've been shot at, of course, but not,
Sure.
this wasn't during, Iraq or Afghanistan. And I wasn't that's a whole different mission that was going on there with the medics. Even the mission shifted a lot to more urban and so forth. But no, it was more, recovery type stuff, if anything. Where I probably saw the most of, I would say, austere medicine has been with our outreach organization, Herbal Medics, where we've gone to Nicaragua, both the East and the West Coast. And we've been in places where you're 100 miles from the nearest road. The only way in is really by boat. Working with the Rama Indian tribe, working with people that were just way out in the middle of nowhere, and dealing with cellulitis, dealing even with leishmaniasis, dealing with things that are more, like that's kind of infectious disease, maybe on that level.
Sure. And did you find that herbs were helpful for things like cellulitis and infectious disease?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's tough, though. The things where we would normally use, antibiotic therapy, you've got to catch it early, and you've got to be really aggressive. And I created kind of my own protocols off of that. That were highly moving toward the idea of biofilm inhibition is a big part of that. For instance, with cellulitis, how do you get the herb to the tissue? So
Right.
I don't know anybody like me. There may be other people out there, but I do all kinds of crazy administrative routes, So I nebulize, I'll use nasal administration, I'll use interocular administration, of course, ears, sublingual, mouth, rectal, vaginal, whether douche, suppository, and of course transdermal, all the different ways that we can get the herb to the tissue. And you really have to be aggressive with that if you're dealing with something as serious as that, or a
Yes.
urinary tract infection that's lower.
Yeah.
Catching that early and getting to it, and as early as possible, or with guys, like something like epididymitis, where you really are just not going to get what you need through to the body and to that area through an oral administration. We're not talking, an antibiotic with a single compound that's been pharmaceutically, tested and driven until we know that's going to go through the bloodstream and get there. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that's gone on in my formula making and my administration routes.
Right on.
Can we backtrack a little bit? Let's talk about your programs. What programs are you running right now, and what are the semantics of each program? What do you do?
Sure. So we have 5 major programs, and those are the clinical herbalism program, which is subdivided into 4 different levels, each with more, obviously, over time, more increasing in terms of what you have to do to get there. And that is clinical herbalism, where, you're seeing patients or clients, depending on what state you live in and what your local rules are and so forth. I'm a licensed acupuncturist as well. So I am licensed technically to be able to be an herbologist, or an herbalist, as we would call it in TCM. But just as a Western herbalist, there's not any licensing. The closest you can even come to it, and it's not really licensing, is to be a registered herbalist with the American Herbalist Guild, which is sort of a peer-reviewed type of process. So a lot of herbalists are coming in, or a lot of herb students are coming in, they want to get registered. So we're able to document their clinical hours, and they come in and they take a bunch of classes, didactic, and then they start working through, kind of what we call our soap note classes, where they're actually kind of working in a class environment, and then eventually being able to shadow, and eventually being able to get some clinical hours, whether through our Herbal Medics outreach programs that we go to for underserved populations, or through our clinics, or whatever. And that's the clinical program. The next program is the advanced medicine making, or the apothecaries program. And this is for people that are trying to they just want to make good medicine. Maybe they want to start their own apothecary online, or maybe they have a brick and mortar store. Maybe they just want to be able to make good medicine for whatever reason. And this is where we get into some of the details of that are, again, pretty extensive. So like not just, alcohol tinctures and decoctions and teas. We're talking multifractional extractions using a number of different solvents, working with different pHs for different specific constituents we're trying to pull out, right? So a lot of phytochemistry involved in that, and pretty advanced. The next program is a family herbalist, which is taught and run most of the curriculum by Katia Lamone, who is a midwife herbalist. She also has a master's in health science, or what you call MHP. So she's worked all over the world in remote areas as an herbalist, or as a midwife as well. So there's a ton of experience. And so we have a doula program there for those who want to be doula certified. We have emergency birth. We have pediatrics. We have prenatal and postpartum medicine. We have elderly or geriatric herbalism. So a lot more for, literally the family. And then we have the austere program, which is run by myself and Dr. Pearson. And then as part of the clinical program, we actually have kind of a subset of that, which is functional medicine, run by myself and Dr. Kyla Helm, who is a medical doctor who also started in the military. And she's been a functional medicine practitioner as a family practice doc for, who knows, like 20 years or something. And she and I have worked together for probably over 10 years, maybe 12 years, with different patients and so forth. And so we started and kind of created and collaborated and created we call it functional botanical medicine. So it's an integration between functional medicine from an allopathic side and botanical medicine from the herbal side. And then finally, we have a program that's kind of like a dialed down clinical program for people who want it. It's called the community herbalism program, which is, people that don't have 3 or 4 years they want to put into a clinical program, but they want to specialize in something for their own community.
Okay.
Nice.
Wow. You got a lot going on.
And where are these programs located?
Yeah.
Probably 90% of our programs now are online,
Oh,
especially
I see.
with
Okay.
COVID that we do. So the rest we do here in Taos so like Wilderness First Aid, which is part of the austere, and Wilderness First Responder is part of the austere. We have what's called a home course, which is an on-site medical experience in an austere environment. All of those are done here in Taos. We have a campus here that's borders on national forests. It's in the mountains just east of town. And
Nice.
we have, and we do, the family, like the emergency birth course and a few of the others that are kind of better if they're on site. We do those here as well. We have a botany program here that we run on site as well.
Cool.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Wow. What kind of people would be interested in a program like this? I'm from this background. So for me, this is great. I'm thinking this is fantastic. But I know average people at home, are probably going to be intimidated maybe when they see what you offer. Who are these programs for, and who actually applies and signs up to be in your programs?
Right. Of course, they're for anybody, but our demographic is much more specifically older folks. And when I say older, I mean they're older than teens and early 20s. So people who are usually professional. We get a lot of people who are either retired or have worked a long time as either an RN or an NP or even sometimes docs and PAs. So people with a licensed healthcare background, but they want to either include and start working with this in their practice. And now we're at a state, thankfully, in our country where it's a lot easier to do. When I first started this, you couldn't do that. And if you were a doc doing it, you really had to worry about, practicing outside the scope of your license. But now, especially with functional medicine, that's changing a lot. So we get a lot of folks like that. We get people that are really pretty serious about wanting to be a professional in some way or another. And less, I would say, so it's a pretty diverse group of people usually in terms of age, cultural background. Somewhere between 25 and 65 is kind of like the age range. I know a lot of schools. I teach at a lot of other schools as a guest teacher, and it's usually more a younger crowd. Usually, I mean, and not to be too stereotypical, it's usually younger women who are maybe they're, instead of going to college or right after college, they're doing this, and it's fairly mono in terms of like what they're able to study and the crowd that, we try to really get a diverse kind of epidemiology as to in our clinics as well, right? Culturally, like we're really trying hard here to get integrated and work with the Pueblos here in the Taos region. And we've worked a lot with the Native American community where there's a specific cultural epidemiology that you're going to find from group to group and from subgroup within there, depending on what kind of nutrition's available to them, where the grocery stores are just a glorified convenience store, or they just don't have healthy water. People literally living, with their uranium tailings and stuff, in some of these areas, not just waterborne diseases, but just like long-term toxicity issues too. Just lifestyle stuff, so I think that's much more important than just, and not to sound disparaging, but if the only clients that you ever have and you ever see are people who are, 30 something wealthy and have tummy troubles because they don't like gluten. I mean, that's certainly an epidemiology that's important to know, but it's a very small slice, I think, of what you should be able to work with herbs if you really want to be able to apply and help people practically,
Yeah.
Sam, you seem like someone, well, I mean, not seem like, but you have been someone who has been interested in herbs, and not only interested, but you grew up with them. You grew up with cultivating plants and herbs and, fruit or vegetables, and you've had a garden and you've continued having an interest, and not only an interest, but using them and learning about them and in all different types of ways throughout your whole life. And not only that, but you seem to be, though you are a Green Beret, you seem to have a more of a connection than a lot of people to Mother Nature, so to speak. You seem to be one who, you mentioned talking to your plants and having, a better outcome with, potentially the growth of the plant and the plant's purpose and so forth. And you seem to be one who's connected to the spirit world in that way. Can you talk about a little bit more of that, your experience with plants energetically. I hear that, if someone were to put their feet on seeds of a particular medicinal plant or even food for a period of time, then that plant will grow according to the needs of that individual. And, whatever else that you may have experienced or have, you know, just come up with within your own self in terms of connecting to the plant kingdom, connecting to nature, and utilizing that in your practice.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think first thing I would say first and foremost is that people need to understand and accept with an open heart that plant medicine is a living medicine. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a static medicine. It is alive. These
Mm-hmm.
plants have thousands and thousands of constituents that our species has been interacting with for hundreds of thousands of years, probably. And
Mm-hmm.
it's in our DNA as well, regardless of wherever
Mm-hmm.
you believe we came from, whether it's from other
Sure.
stars or whether we, evolved out of,
Mm-hmm.
from primates or whatever your belief system may be.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question of the fact that there's a difference between living medicine and dead medicine. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, there has been again, and it's hard to like continue without just like painting a little bit of a picture. You have to remember there's been a sort of cloud of misinformation over this fact
Mm-hmm.
for almost a century. If you go back
Mm-hmm.
to literally to the Flexner reports of 1910 or so at that time, which completely changed the face of medical education and medical information in this country to where
Mm-hmm.
you could not practice, you couldn't teach, you couldn't practice unless it were from a higher, university that was accredited in this allopathic, what came forward as the allopathic. You have to remember, like in the late 1800s, the allopath was where you went to die. Like it was a bad word. They were mercury and arsenic. And,
Mm-hmm.
but anyway, this became the standard. And so then only white, wealthy males were the only people that were going to be able to study that. And of course, went through many of its own mistakes. But during that period of time, and that's fine. I mean, medicine is a growing, learning, field, and there's no right answer to anything all the time, and there's no wrong answer 100% of the time either. So that's I'm not disparaging that. I'm just saying that the bad side of that is there was a cloud of misinformation, I think, over herbal medicine, and it kind of died for decades until kind of a
Yeah.
rebirth in the 60s and 70s when it went kind of all the way to the other side, the woo side. And then it kind of came
Yeah.
crawling back on its hands and knees, with this idea of Western medical herbalism,
Mm-hmm.
where it's all constituent based, and
Right.
please let us in if we talk about berberine. And then
Yeah.
if you go to the Deshay Act of 1995,
Yeah.
where your large pharmaceutical and nutraceutical companies were able to put a leash on the FDA in order to be able to expand their own wealth, and now it's it's $1 billion a year industry. Now it's okay, because now you can break apart these constituents and say, yeah, according to this and this and this. But the main reason you can is because it's money. There's a lot of money in it. Everybody uses them. You can go to aisle 13 in any grocery store and get a bunch of herbs, right? Encapsulated, even though it's the worst way to get them. You can do that. So
Right.
all of that is kind of like the picture in which this, medicine and kind of reawakening into herbalism. So for me personally, my journey with medicine is very much, I think, synonymous with my journey in nature in general. I've always been running around barefoot in the woods kind of guy. I've always loved that. That's been who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has given me a relationship with nature. And I used to teach primitive skills a lot. And before I did that, I tested my own primitive skills a lot. And I would go out in the woods in the mountains of Colorado, southern Colorado, with nothing more than an elk skin, a knife, and something to carry or boil water in.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it, so making my own friction fires and gathering and, foraging. And of course, you can't do this in the middle of winter, but, especially starting out, but certainly doing it at the times when the acorns are out, and the acorns here you can actually eat without leaching. They're a little on the bitter side, but you can eat them. The prickly pear fruits are out, and the behonia berries are out. And so all of this was possible to be able to do those types of things without even hunting any meat and just being able to forage plants. And in that process became very close to the idea of whatever you need, the planet provides when you really come from this very kind of open-minded need. And it wasn't something that I thought about. It was just something that started happening. It'd be like, man, I'm really hungry. I haven't eaten for like 24 hours and I could really use something. I come around the bend and here'd be like a whole, just like a complete buffet of rose hips, ready to eat and things like that. And I started thinking, wow, this is interesting, or I really need this kind of a stick to be able to start, this type of wood to be able to start a fire here, friction fire. And it's like, boom, And so I started thinking, is there a connection to all of this, And so I was doing lots of things like that. And I think that made its way into my kind of, I guess, psyche and connection to nature in the sense that I realized that my life has always been very intuition led, like what does your intuition say? And not like what do you think, like consciously what do you ask yourself your intuition. I always tell people, we used to do this whole, like these intuition exercises in some of my classes, not herbal classes, but my survival classes and so forth. And I'd always tell people it's the difference between perception and projection. Like when you really perceive something, it comes to you from inside and you didn't even realize that it was something you'd ever thought about and boom, it's there. That's right. Perception versus projection, where you're like, ooh, I wonder if, I have this intuition, and then you're coming at it from the conscious side. So it's sort of like that idea, maybe in the Aboriginal idea of going into the dream time or going into the period, that area that's not accessible with the state of mind that we're in right now as we're talking and we're thinking through this. Or when you dream and you wake and the dream, you forget it after a while, or it's different than it really was when you were there. Or who knows, after we die and maybe we come back into another life. All of those areas are areas in which there's a language that we cannot describe with physical verbal language. And this leads me to then when I got my TCM, when I went and got my master's in acupuncture and oil medicine, which was only about 6 years ago when I started into that. I got it, 2 or 3 years ago. I was so blown away by the fact that suddenly there was this language to be able to, that was so much closer to how I think plants actually work with our bodies than what I've been using with this sort of Western allopathic. Even if you go back and use words like vulnerary and styptic and things that you go back into like the last century of Western herbalism, it still doesn't even come close. And even traditional Greek herb medicine, which is energetically defined, but it's not the same as thousands of years of empirical data of classical Chinese medicine that then, during the revolution became traditional Chinese medicine. And lots was kind of chopped off here and there. But the source of it remains that this language that describes how plants work in our body was so much closer, and it just gave me, it was a whole nother level for working with things like autoimmune issues and chronic, age, like perimenopausal endocrine problems and things that I was just playing whack-a-mole with using Western herbs in sort of a pharmaceutical approach. But you're not even using at least the pharmaceuticals, for good or better or worse, they're going to do one thing really strong and really well. And herbs don't even do that necessarily, because again, you're talking about thousands of constituents. And, that whole idea of that kind of amphoteric quality that we have of our body saying, well, I need this, but I don't need this. This gets metabolized, this gets used, and so forth. So, that language of TCM really played strong to me. And I've been into martial arts my whole life. I have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I started doing Qigong exercises when I was 13 off of a book in the library. And I think that Qigong exercises was something I did all through the Q course in Special Forces, and it's what got me through injury-free, through selection. It didn't matter if I only got 3 hours of sleep. I'd wake up and the first thing I'd do is a breathing exercise before I even get out of the bunk, and then get on with whatever the hell was going to give me that day. But it's like start off with that. And that really, by the time I got into acupuncture clinics, it was like, oh, I've been messing with this my whole life. I mean, since I was 13, and like the Qi, the idea of needles and working with Qi was something that immediately started working so well for me that even people that were, most of my, co-students a lot of them were from, Taiwan or even mainland China. Even though Qi was a part of their cultural upbringing, they never worked with it. They didn't spend time doing it. And it takes years and years, I think, of doing it. And so I was like, wow, all of these, the language, the Qi, the idea of, in Qigong or Qi in general, like there's a, kind of this life force idea that we would maybe say is like quantum energy that has its own sense and its own consciousness. And there's a different one for plants, and there's a different one for humans, and there's a different kind for a certain type of chi in your body, for this, for the food and for the air and so forth. And they all mix together to become another kind of chi. And it's this really kind of, we would say quaint, but a very, I think, empirical, again, driven sort of observational idea of language that really makes sense much better than the Western languages that I'd been using to try, well, English in particular, to be able to ascribe what an herb is doing. So that opened up a whole nother reality. And I think that maybe on an intellectual level is that bridge between the human and the plant that I really love, because it's that problem solving. I love being in my head and solving problems that way too. But at the same time, it's absolutely necessary to have that spirit level, just barefoot sinking into the earth and feeling, and really feeling, and not just describing some woo, idea to it, like, oh, I'm an intuitive herbalist and I think that they might call it poison oak, but it's actually really good for the skin. I've actually had to work or been around people who are coming from that kind of a background. They get, highly intimidated by me, of course, immediately, and have problems with me because of that. But it's like, dude, nothing that you've said here actually stands to any kind of test of practicality. So you have to have both. You have to have a foot in both of those areas, I think, then be that medium that kind of combines the two into the human experience and the human condition.
Do you think herbals are superior to pharma? Or what is your feeling on the war between pharma and natural supplement world? We're always under attack. You kind of touched on that.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that there is a war, because there shouldn't be. The problem again is profit motive, of course, as we all know. That's clear, and the amount of lobbying power that our pharmaceutical industries have. There's no, if in a perfect world we could work together so beautifully. If I get hit by a bus, I want a good orthopedic surgeon. I don't want somebody waving a yarrow plant around my open fractures. Yeah. And if I, on the other hand, if I have endocrine disorders and I have autoimmune problems, I don't want pharma throwing crap at me. And if I have hypertension, I do not want that. If I have GERD, there are so many ways we can get at the source of that with herbal medicine, especially as we start to work into, again, kind of the TCM or Ayurvedic, any kind of an energetic language will help us a lot with the underlying causes. But even just on a more superficial kind of level, not purely symptomatic in a pharmaceutical way, but symptomatic in an herbal way, which is a little deeper, I think, in my opinion. We can certainly, I've turned around dozens, who knows, maybe well over 100 people who were addicted to, Prilosec or any of your, pharmaceuticals that they couldn't get off of without horrible, rebound reflux type of situations. And I've turned them around in a matter of, a couple of weeks, even just working with, of course, there's diet to be considered as well in there, and exercise and lifestyle. But in general, just working with herbs and being able to approach it from the standpoint of supporting the liver, supporting, what we call our cholagogues and our choleretics, to be able to support the quality and the production, the amount of bile, and how that works in that whole circuit between our stomach all the way down to the small intestine, and and back up, from the common bile duct and that loop out to the portal vein and back up to the liver, and how we're supporting and how much junk is getting to the liver that the liver is overwhelmed with over time. Even from a Western perspective, that's not even, that's just pure Western physiology, I think, is far more effective in that case than, working with pharmaceuticals for that. But again, there's times where there's just massive inflammation and you have no choice but to hit, the steroids and turn that inflammation off. You can't work the body is shutting down, and pharmaceuticals work really well for that kind of thing. If you're going septic from a kidney infection or, an upper urinary tract infection, you need IV antibiotics, man. If you didn't have it, could you do it with herbs? Maybe, God forbid. I wouldn't want to have to be stuck with that where it only could work with herbs. I have worked with really bad UTIs that are chronic and, and cystitis, and even, and even autoimmune, even interstitial cystitis, so effectively, but it takes work. It takes strong formulas, and it takes applying them the right way. So different body tissues are easier to work with than others. The more you can get the herb to the tissue, usually the better. But still, if you go nose to nose with pharmaceuticals, you're never going to have that same intensity of effectiveness for certain things, turning off specific enzymes or doing whatever, that you're going to get with pharmaceuticals.
What about this burgeoning problem of antibiotic resistance? To me, it seems like herbals don't present that problem. Is this a situation where you would agree that
yes,
they might be superior?
I think the human kind of can get more tolerant of certain herbs and even formulas, but yes. And even we find, again, so a good example of here where we can have a good cooperative interaction between pharma and herbs would be the idea of efflux inhibition. So if we get a bacteria, let's give the example of like MRSA or a staph that has a certain type of efflux pump that develops, and that's how they become resistant and become an MDR, multiple drug resistant bacteria, is these efflux pumps that pump out. As soon as that antibiotic comes across the cell wall, boom, it's back out. And then we've got herbal, constituents like MHC that's found in our Oregon grape leaf, that's 5' methoxyhydrocarbon that will those particular efflux pumps to the extent of making, maybe a 15 times increase in the efficacy of whatever you're using as an antibiotic. And that could be herbal or it could be pharmaceutical. So again, for something like that, and then biofilm inhibition, I think is where herbs. Oh my gosh, I have some incredible clinical stories of people, everything from C. diff to pneumonia, and turning that around. Even a family member with pneumonia, where it just 9 months of constant antibiotics and never getting anywhere, and within 2 weeks of working with biofilm inhibition and nebulizing those within a week, really turning that around with 2 weeks, being able to show on testing how much that had turned around. C. diff, same thing, all the way up to literally getting to the point where surgery is necessary, and turning it around in a week using specific biofilm inhibiting type of herbs. So this is a place where the two worlds really can merge and work well together. And this is why I love and laud the idea of functional medicine. And I hope that just continues to grow. So at least from the allopathic side, we've got this acceptance. And eventually I would love to see us have some kind of Western herbalism licensing program. We need it here in the US, because there are some, there are people that are just straight up quacks practicing with herbs that they don't know what they're doing. They don't have any background in Western medicine. They couldn't, like I've worked in places as an instructor and running clinics where students from other schools are talking about, heat rashes. And I'll say, well, let me take a look. And the patient will pull up their arm and it's textbook ringworm. I mean, ringworm. So it's like this kind of experience only comes from medical experience and really learning the basics and the basics. I got into med school when I was 42. I went back to school. It was kind of in the transition period. My family, I had to raise a family first, and I was like, I'm going to give up on the school idea, like of making my own school. I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to med school. So and I had a liberal arts degree, 100%. So I had to go back and get all the pre-med and get through the MCATs and stuff. And I got into a bunch of schools. I ended up having to choose between family or medicine, and I walked away from med school. They kept the door open for a couple of years, but looking back, it was a really good thing. I mean, as that door closed, the version 2.0 of my school opened, and that's been like hit the ground running ever since for the last 17 years.
Yeah, it seems like everything was serendipity in your life, from birth till now, everything, your military experience, the way you were raised. And I really loved the way you put the whole story about when you had to give up after working so hard for that to get into medical school and studying for pre-med and walking 10 miles a day studying.
Yeah.
You put me to shame. I'm in school right now. And I was like, 10K. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It was a 10K. It was 5K. I'm like almost exactly whatever that is, 6.2 miles. Is it 6.2 miles? Yeah. I mean, literally like almost exactly door to door. Yeah, that's how I learned. And that was 3 hours a day that I had to study that I would never have gotten just sitting at home. So,
and it shows how much love you have for this. And I just remember the point you made, and I thought was super poignant. And I would love for you to expound on this, because it gets into kind of more of the spiritual aspect that Patrick was bringing up, that you had ideas, you had plans for your life, and you thought the natural thing to do is to become a doctor, but it didn't work out. And you did all that work. What was your feeling, and what did you conclude? Because things happened right after you had to leave.
Yeah, and that was difficult. Oh my God. I mean, I wept like a child driving away from med school that last time. And I knew it wasn't coming back. And
Yeah.
it was just like, what the hell was all this for?
Yeah.
And to move to San Antonio, which my wife was from San Antonio and her mother was getting old. And
Hmm.
she ended up living with us for the last 5 years of her life. And that was part of why I got into several med schools, but UTESCA was the one that was like, okay, this is the one, San Antonio, here we come and let's do it. And we never would have probably made that move if it hadn't all happened.
Hmm.
All the things that had to happen for that. And then picking up in my 13-year-old daughter, who was her love of horses. She started at the age of 6. She does it as a professional now. She jumps horses. She trains horses. She trains people to jump horses, and she competes, and it's her living. And, so that was really important to her. And all those things kind of came together down there. And it's like, and at that point, it was like, well, some financial stuff kind of fell apart for us once we got there and got established. And we literally picked the barn that my daughter would wanted to ride at before we picked a house, because we're like, we're not driving, an hour and a half every day anymore to commute to get her to the horses. So we found the barn out. We went through every barn, found the barn, picked a house. It was like not even 5 minutes away. And I was like, here we are, and it's everything set. And then things started falling apart. It's like, well, I'm 42. Actually, I think it was 43 at that time. Just turned 43. And I was like, man, if I was going to be a doc by this point in my life,
Hmm.
I should already have been there. My daughter she needs to do this, and it's expensive. Horses are expensive. And
Oh, yeah.
so, it's like, yeah, we could all move out into an apartment in the city, and she could pretty much like crash that dream of my daughter's, or I could walk away from this and realize that this was all part of the steps of getting me down here in the first place. And within a few months of that, this 50-acre rock quarry there was a big lawsuit around it, literally kind of dropped in my lap. It took a couple of years there was a bunch of hearings that had to happen, but I was this third party that they accepted. And so I ended up for a very, for not a lot of money. I mean, it was enough money to be affordable for me in the hill country area to be able to get this very raw, rough piece of land that had been horribly abused for about 10 years, and to be able to restore this and to be able to have it as a center for our survival and our medicine and our wildcrafting and just, all the wildlife that was already there. And now it is a wildlife, part of it is anyway, conservation easement on there. And so it's this incredible piece of land that just dropped in my lap. And it was like, well, that never would have happened either, if I'd stayed. And, I don't know, I probably have, I don't know, maybe half a dozen different doctor friends that I talked to since then that were like, count yourself lucky, buddy. It's like, could I trade my life for yours, please? Because
Yeah.
I'm not saying that being a doctor sucks, but it's tough, man. And
Yeah.
especially it's not gotten any easier. Oh my God, for docs, it's really tough. And like even Kyla, who is on our faculty as a functional medicine doc, she was ready to walk away from it until functional medicine became something. She was like, I just can't do this. I'm not helping people like I wanted to do.
Right. Yeah. Sam, in regards to toxic herbs, there's a lot of herbs that, most herbs have, some sort of toxicity, but some herbs are, as you know, a lot more toxic than others. And a lot of times there's a function of the toxicity of, a lot of these toxic herbs. I myself have, an interest in using toxic herbs for a lot of different things. And I noticed that you have a particular herb in a few of your formulas, I think. And I looked at it because I didn't see it before. It's a certain kind of lettuce that you use, and there's a little bit of, toxicity associated with it, and it might be used for, calming the nervous system, used for anxiety or something like that. What is that lettuce, and what other herbs do you find, interesting because of their toxicity and the function of the toxicity?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. That particular lettuce is wild lettuce, sometimes called opium lettuce, sometimes called prickly lettuce. This lactuca is the genus. And then the species that I like to use that is the highest in those constituents is the verosa species. So lactuca verosa, which is more of a European species, but you can find it here in the U.S. The cereola is a species you normally see growing everywhere along the roadsides here. And you can use that too. but the Verosa is the one. And
Okay.
so what I actually do in one of our products that I make, again, I don't think anybody else really makes this as a product that they sell in an apothecary, is I make what's called lactocarium. And this used to be done back in the 19th century a lot. You could buy it in European pharma stores, and it's basically a black resin that you end up with after you've extracted it. And I use alcohol and water to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And heat, obviously, and end up with this really stiff kind of tarry resin.
Mm-hmm.
And so we sell that by the gram, and a dosage for that for an adult is about 1/3 to 1/2 gram. You could take as much as a gram, and it has a number of really interesting it kind of depends on the person. Like most nervines, it kind of depends on the person. We find this in pharmaceutical medicine as well, but why we give Ritalin to people who are, hyperactive,
Right.
or used to, I don't know what they're doing now, but used to, and, which would be seemingly paradoxical, right? And it's sort of like that with Lactuca. I find that people with ADHD, it really helps them focus. People with anxiety, it really helps calm the anxiety and helps them focus. It can be used for sleep as well, but I would say more from the standpoint of like when your mind is racing type of insomnia, and you can use it that way. So what we do is we sell it, and it's depending on your taste buds and what you like and don't like it. Some people think it tastes great, other people hate it. But what I like to do is just say, take it. You can reconstitute it in like 40% alcohol. You can even reconstitute it in water, although it takes longer. But you can just take that and just put the tar right under your tongue and just let it sublingually dissolve over about 5 minutes. And it has an incredible effect. I would not call that a high toxicity herb, though. I would call that maybe a medium toxicity at most.
Okay.
You could certainly take that even, a couple of times a day if you needed to for short periods of time. I'd say if you take it for a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, take a break from it then for the same amount of time. But it's not like a high toxicity herb where, like something like Gelsemium, like yellow jessamine, where it's strictly a low dose botanical, drop wise only, or even further out in there, something like Datura, right, where we've got these incredible effects from from constituents like atropine, for instance, and scopolamine in there, and it's an incredible pain reliever, an incredible smooth muscle relaxant. You can turn around. I mean, it's as close, maybe it's not the only one, but it is, as a plant, maybe as close to something like epinephrine for something like bronchospasms as you're going to get for somebody who's maybe having an anaphylactic reaction. And so just the smoke from a leaf, I use the seed and I use it topically, but really friends and family only. I would never sell it to the public, but it's a friends and family only. I've had incredible results with that particular plant. Semium, another really good pain reliever, but also again drop-wise. So I dose it drop-wise, and I say if my dosage on the bottle is, let's say, 1/2 to 1 teaspoon, which would be 2.5 3. Well, how much a teaspoon is 5 mils? Sorry, so 5 mils. So it's like 0.5 to 5 mils in a teaspoon. And if that's the dosage, then I'll have it so that there's only going to be a max of like 5 drops per dose. So there'd be 1 milliliter of Gelsemium sempervirens per milliliter of the total formula. That way there's no way to really overdose on that. But foxglove is another one, right? That's the cardiovascular effects of that have been obviously converted into digitalis that we've used in pharmaceutical medicine. You can go on and on. Metformin, Galiga officinalis, or Galigan into metformin. Lots and lots of these kinds of things that, the plant and that particular plant constituent by itself, you have to remember too, is more toxic if it's just extracted that way. I mean, scopolamine from Datura is, used for, they make a dust and blow it in your face, in some places you have to be careful, like in places in Mexico and Central America, and you wake up 2 days later with your bank account empty, naked on the bed. But, But so there's a lot of that. And I think the thing to take from it really is that the more toxic the plant is, oftentimes the more medicinal it is as well. But we really, it's not like dosing pharmaceuticals where we can be very specific about one compound, depending on what time of year you harvested it and what the rain was like that year and how you dried it and how you prepared it. The dosage can be a wide spectrum. So, it's not like we would take something like that and use it, in analgesia or as anesthetic or something for a surgery, because we probably, kill 50% of the people that we gave it to for some of these things,
Right. One thing that I've noticed about herbs is live herbs have so much stronger of an effect sometimes than dried herbs. For example, flowers, like you take the mimosa flower and you take a few grams of mimosa, pour some mimosa flower, like the living mimosa flower, pour some steamed water over it and allow it to brew for a couple minutes and drink it. And it just puts this big smile on your face. It's just, it makes you feel really good. But you take, mimosa flower that's been dried and pour some steamed water over it, let it steep for 10, 20, 5, 10 minutes or so, drink it, and it barely has an effect at all. Do you find this through all different types of herbs?
No,
Or
it's
you
very
don't?
specific, and there are some herbs that you're absolutely right that work better.
Yeah,
Mimosa is a great example of that.
yeah,
Nettles leaf is another good example of the fresh
okay,
leaf. And so, what you want to try to do is make medicine from that if you
okay,
can. That's
yeah,
what where like multifractional extractions. So I will use oftentimes, like with nettles leaf, I'll use an ACV, an apple cider vinegar soak first,
yeah,
and that's the fresh leaf that's just been harvested, and then from there. Um, Water, glycerin, honey are all part of and heat are all part of the extraction process after that
Mm-hmm.
ACV soak. So we get uh, certain herbs that's absolutely the case with, and they work better fresh. I would say that's a smaller percentage of herbs that are dried that in my Materia Medica primarily, I would say probably 5 to 10% of them fresh. And
yeah,
a fresh harvest gives us an amazing, extract, or even if we just do a fresh tincture, just a simplest method of just pushing them into a mason jar and putting our, whatever vodka or,
Right.
40% alcohol in there, you're going to get something different than what you would if you dried it and tried to do the
Mm-hmm.
same thing
sure,
or even a different thing. But that said, there are some herbs where drying is definitely preferable. And one of the reasons is because some of those alkaloids are pretty toxic, and we can kind of ameliorate some of the toxic properties as well by drying. An
sure,
example of that would be like butterfly weed or pleurisy root, any of the Asclepias, any of the milkweeds that we use, whether it's that two species or some of the others. I find dried are better. Poke root is a great example. Fresh poke root, oof, no, forget it. You don't need it. It's way too strong as it is. And so it
yeah.
helps ameliorate some of that toxicity by drying it too.
What do you think about some of those herbs, like the yellow herbs, like philodendron, Bicol skullcap, cactus? Have you ever used those in living form? Highly antimicrobial herbs.
Yes, so I'm not fresh. I did
Okay.
grow Bicol skullcap and tried it fresh once. I was only able to grow one plant down in San Antonio. I grew a whole bunch of TCM plants, and that one
Yeah.
I was able to pull out. It's hard, and it didn't like the heat there, the
Okay.
afternoon heat. But yes, so all of those, so those are so Coptis, for instance. There we're talking about the yellows coming from Bicolin.
Right.
Scutellaria bicolensis or Bicol skullcap is
Yeah.
going to be. I'm not sure what gives it the yellow
Okay.
country, but that's Bicolin and Woganin are
Yeah.
two of the big
Mhm.
constituents, right? Yes, and so from it, and philodendron as well. Those are all from TCM perspective, what they would call herbs to be able to disperse or get rid of heat. And heat can mean inflammation, it can mean toxic heat can mean infection, and they certainly do that. And I use Bicol skullcap all the time. It's an
Yeah.
incredible biofilm inhibitor. So for infection and for inflammation,
Mhm.
upper respiratory tract, incredible for things like that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Coptis. I don't really use Coptis because I use Algarita, which is a hill country
Mm.
Berberis, Berberis trifoliolata in the hill
Right.
country is just as strong. And of course, it has other constituents as well. But if you compare them in terms of the berberine content, they're very, very similar. Very
Mm.
similar.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sam, let's talk a little bit about the state of the world today. We've had unprecedented last couple of decades with natural disasters. We've had political issues here in the United States. We've had plague. We've had it all. Um, do you think the average American, in spite of all of these things happening to us, is still woefully unprepared for disaster?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not just individually. I think as a society, we're horrible with disasters. I mean, our biggest issue you were mentioning that the Texas hurricane,
Hmm.
Harvey, I believe it was,
Right.
our biggest problem was just the run on the gasoline, on the gas. There was plenty of gas, but one of the refineries that closed down that time of year all the time. It's like, oh, the refineries, well, yeah, for maintenance, they do this every year for a week. Was at the exact same time. It's like the refineries are down. And it's like, people were filling up trash cans full of gas
right
in their back of their pickups and getting in fist fights with the gas. So we had a whole dispatch system to be able to phone ahead just so we could make sure we had enough gas to get up to Houston and down the Texas coast and back when we did that. And that's fine. That's part of what we do is our scout. We actually have a whole specialty in our teams that does that. That's our scouting and our dispatch and all of that. But yeah, we are the worst part of any disaster in this country is the human response to it. We just are woefully unable to pull together in a disaster, and instead it's every person for themselves.
Yeah, I used to be a reporter and covered many major disasters. And what I always witnessed is people have, no knocking our government, but people think that things are going to be taken care of. They don't understand what FEMA does and what it really is. And then they find themselves in these really awful situations. What should people be thinking about? I mean, it's not getting any better. We have storms coming every season, nor'easters, you name it, hurricanes, tornadoes where I'm located. What should the average person be thinking about for preparation? I think people, when they hear preparation, first of all, I want to preface, people get these ideas, of crazy preppers and whatnot, but what should the average person be thinking about?
Start small. It's what I always advise. Start for the 72-hour disaster. Do you have enough water, clean water, or water purification system to get you through that? Do you have something to give you light? And it doesn't even have to be power. We are addicted to power in this country. With you go to other places, developing nations, and it's like power's out. How's that different? We call that Monday. And so it's a whole different thing here that we have to have it, and communication. So it doesn't mean that you have to go get ham certified, although I highly recommend that. Right. But, that's a whole nother level. But just having, candles, if that's all, just for light and something to be able to make sure you stay warm if it's winter, or stay cool if it's summer, being able to deal with that, the things that power would give you. What part of the country do you live in, and what would those things be for 72 hours that you would have to deal with is the best. And then, of course, food is a part of that as well. And once you've done that for 72 hours, then you can just copy and paste that, for bigger blocks of time, so that you're not starting right off. It's overwhelming for a lot of people to think about, oh my God, I have to store up enough food for 2 years, And there was a time in our lives where we were always there, and we're a little less than that now, quite a bit less than that now. But, we're coming back to it now. And moving up to New Mexico was a huge transition for a lot of things. So we got rid of a lot of stuff and coming back into that. But, I think that, the old adage of just basically what you have, make sure you've got the water, make sure you've got some form of shelter or warmth or cool, to keep you cool, protect you from the elements. And that can include, of course, your clothing and so forth. And then like the individual disaster issues, if you have to get out, you don't want to, but if you have to leave home, right? Don't just say, well, I'm going to bug out. That's the worst thing. Bug in first. But if you have to leave home, making sure that you've got something to take with you that's not just the stuff you need that we've just talked about, but also a passport or ID, some paperwork that's going to make sure that you can connect back with the system. If, let's say that a forest fire or a tornado or a hurricane or whatever, and you have to grab and go, have that stuff accessible and able to get out of there as well. But if you're bugging in, then again, the basics of power, light, and then security, of course. Everybody thinks of security, right? It's the first thing that people think because of the society we live in. It's like we're kind of ingrained into this idea that people with guns are going to take from people that don't have guns. I'm not saying that's not true. It absolutely can be true, but I'd rather have one firearm and be really good with it than have 10 and not have ever really know how to use any of them.
Right.
So that's something to bear in mind as well if you're going to go the firearms route. And I'm not saying not to. I mean, I've got my own little armory too, but I have training, and I come from a background of self-defense and of, being able to neighborhood defense and being able to block off a whole area and being able to set up checkpoints and that kind of thing is something that's part of my military training. So I think in regards to that, it's like, well, what kind of firearm are we going to need if we just need to shoot through somebody's window? It's not going to be a 5.56, right? What kind of firearm are we going to need if we need to snipe? What kind of firearms do we need if we need to clear a house? Those kinds of things are things I think about, but I don't think, again, back to the 72-hour problem, those are not the big, those are not the big problems. The little that you should be really focusing on. The big problems you should be focusing on are, again, just getting through those make sure that you can get through 72 hours and be comfortable and be fed and not get, some kind of gastroenteritis from bad water.
That's right.
And then, of course, along with that, medicine. This is where, if you practice medicine, whatever kind of medicine it is, you're always going to be in demand. We always need medicine, right? And for me, that's herbal medicine. And I think if you're getting into this and you're listening to this because you're into herbal medicine, what's practical, whether it's, starting from a book like mine or, David Hoffman has a great, his Holistic Herbal is a great introductory book. Or if you're, more advanced than that, but having your own apothecary and starting to build your own herbs, getting familiar with those herbs and having them around and using them, just for your family and friends and getting used to them, how they taste, how you get the herbs out of them. And it's a consistency that's important there. It's like, it's like exercise. Like, you say, well, I'm going to start exercising, and you go run 5 miles and then you spend 5 days recovering from it versus, running, a little bit, a few blocks every day at first,
Well, one thing that I think Americans slowly we're starting to get kind of smart about this because of the things that have happened. But, you do a lot of humanitarian work through your organization. Tell me if you agree with me. Infection is probably something that is not on people's minds that should be at the forefront of any preparation plan. And so with that said, what should people be stocking in their cabinets, and what should they be training or learning to know?
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to find a lot more of that. And especially as the climate changes, we're going to get more infectious disease moving north as well that we wouldn't have seen other places. And when I got into med school, they had a whole, the MPH program that you could get a dual degree with. And they were down on the border because you would see, the Texas-Mexican border, the colonias that were these just, villages horribly, basically real estate scams that took advantage of undocumented immigrants who they sold this like land you couldn't grow dirt on and along the border there. So you have this like literally like emerging, developing nation kind of environment there where you're seeing things that you would never see anywhere else or without going, to a whole different country. So yeah, you're going to see that. You're going to see cholera. You're going to see waterborne infections. You're going to see even, Hep A, maybe things that you're going to find in borne disease that you're going to otherwise wouldn't see. So in terms of infectious disease, yes, the good news is that I think you can get by, and I get into this in the book, of course, specifically with like what are some of the things you want to accomplish. You have direct antibacterials, you have direct antivirals, which are, that's a very moving target, but you still have herbs that help you with that. Then you have herbs that are kind of indirect in the sense that they tonify certain tissue, whether it's the mucosa or the submucosal lymph or the lymph and immune system. Herbs that help tonify the terrain as such. And I think with herbs, you really have to kind of go in with both of those in mind. And so how do we support the body in something like an infection? And then how do we have some direct antibacterials as well? And I think you can get by, with 25 to 30 herbs and be able to build up a pretty strong pharmacy or, herbal pharmacy for most infectious disease with that few of herbs, if you know what you're doing.
Right on.
The first time we went down to Nicaragua, I had 40 herbs. Well, I had formulas, like pre-made formulas. I had probably 10 of those, maybe a dozen, and then 40 simples. And now, like when we go out to places, it's like, how did we do that with 40 herbs? Now I need I like to have like 100. I mean, I have probably 350 in the apothecary, but if I can have 100 to 120 simples, it's like, ooh, wow, I've got a great, I can do pretty much anything. And if I run out of this one, I can do this and so forth. Yeah. And then of course I have some formulas pre-made too, but you can do it with much less than that.
Yeah. It's similar to the kinds of packs. I don't know if you're familiar with things like the Jace case or whatever, and they have like the top, most important antibiotics in there. And it sounds like kind of the same principle is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay. So for people who are interested in joining your school or any of your programs, one question that keeps coming to mind is, do you need to be in good shape to be part of one of your programs? What kind of prerequisites should people have if they're interested?
For any of the programs other than the austere, no. The answer is definitely no. And even for the austere, if you're not interested, you don't care about coming up to the home course or any of the on-site stuff, the answer is still no. For any of our outreach stuff, you don't have to be in great shape, but you just have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, in the sense that, we almost always are in a camping type of situation, right? And we take care of ourselves, right? We bring our own food in, we cook our own, we rotate through the team because we have different team duties, basically. And that's part of our whole specialty programs as we go through. And so one of them is the provider. For instance, you're the team medic for a day. You're also the person who takes care of all the menu and the cooking for the day. Not just one person. There'll be maybe 3 or 4 people that are playing that role. And then we'll switch out. So we take care of ourselves, and the idea is to be able to go into a disaster or go into any kind of a remote environment and not put any kind of a strain on the resources there, the infrastructure there. So that means being kind of comfortable with the fact that you might, you've got to be comfortable camping and nothing major. You don't have to, go put on a backpack and hike for 10 miles. I would love to have that. And it used to be I did. And I had an entire program called the Core Basic that kind of put that to test. And it was like, I think the prerequisite, you had to be able to walk, like with a day pack on for 3 miles and still be able to function, and so it's not much, right? But there was a time where I was really trying to come up with like kind of my own version of an A team and for post-disaster. And I would have loved to have that. I even wanted people to get like a Class B skydiving license and be able to push out supplies, that couldn't get into any other way. But, that takes a whole different bandwidth. And so, time and energy and bandwidth has just kind of distilled it all down to what we have today, which is much more, what you would get is in a clinic. You're not going to be, do doctors have to be in amazing shape to go to med school? No, I mean, you have to be willing to put up with a lot of sleep deprivation, but you don't have to be in incredible shape. In fact, if anything, they make you in much worse shape because you're eating crappy food and never getting enough sleep.
Yeah.
The irony.
All right.
Sounds awesome. Sam, I think we're running out of time. One thing that intrigues me about you, you have a life of really interesting just events and things that you've learned. And, one thing about you that I appreciate is your connection with nature. And you talk about the language of chi and the language of intuition. And, the language of intuition, I like to refer in myself as the language of feeling. The language of feeling, it doesn't lie, if you trust it. And it feels like it's so important all the time, but, especially now in this time that we're living in right now. And I feel like there's a lot of people who are so disconnected to that language, the language of feeling, the language of intuition, the language of interaction, the language of, connecting with, that feeling and, knowing where somebody's at and working with that and, potentially knowing what's around the corner in your daily life, whether it be one thing or another. And, it's for people who aren't connected that way. What can you say that can help people establish that type of understanding?
Yeah, I think that I always say that intuition is like any other muscle in your body. The more you use it, the better you're going to get at it. And so to learn to trust it, there are a lot of different exercises I think you can do and come up with. But again, that has to be led by intuition itself. It's kind of a self-perpetuating thing. So what is it you want to be intuitive about? And can you translate that to something else? And the answer, in my opinion, is yes. That can be just being intuitive about your own body, setting up a time to just do nothing but stretch and really feel what muscles need work, where proprioception of what muscle, if I'm just going to stand here on one leg and kind of balance, what muscles like just getting into that feeling of what your own body is doing, or maybe you're not even, maybe just getting up and being able to touch your toes is difficult. Well, let's work on that then and find where do you feel? And then the other side of that is the external. And I think the natural world is a place to go for that. And just something as simple as like a sit spot, so that's kind of a concept that came and I think was probably heralded more by maybe Tom Brown Jr. than anybody. I know TBJ, who's, he passed recently. And, regardless of what you may think of him and all of that, But that all aside, the idea of a sit spot where you go to the same spot at the same time every day and you just sit and you just observe nature. And it could be for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever you're able to do comfortably, and make sure you're comfortable so you're not going to sit there and fidget, but you're going to sit and observe. The amount that you'll learn about your natural world and the amount of intuition that starts to happen as you see things and just connect to them. And you'll be like, hey, you can do that for a week and you'll be like, oh my God, I never noticed this one plant over here. I just noticed this for the first. It's been right in front of me and I just now noticed it.
Yeah.
Birds are a good way. I love watching birds, and it's so funny how like some species of birds, it's like, what are, I hear this call, it's like, I need to know what this is.
Yeah.
And they'll hide, it's like you trying to see and they're hide, they just, and then one day they'll like, here I am, I'm showing you, you got 10 seconds to look at me, and then they're gone. And it's like, hey, and your intuition is tied to that now. You're tied to the natural world. It's like, that happened for a reason. The sound of this flock of birds that I heard first before I even saw, that happened for a reason. There is a connection that we have to nature that is so deep in our nervous system and our DNA that we completely ignore. And it's something that I think you can only get by just living that and being comfortable, being more and more comfortable with it. I think of some of the things I put myself into and, wild animals that I've encountered in the wild in different situations where looking back on it's like, man, I'm lucky I wasn't a meal for a bear there, but it was just like the connection was right there, I had one where I was literally going on a vision quest. This was a long time ago, and I'm probably you may think I'm an ass for talking about my vision quest, but this was a very long time ago for me, and that time has come and passed. And I had my own little ritual. I was going to clear, like I had a piece of sage that I'd gathered from that high mesa, and I saged myself, and it's like, well, all my clothes, because you die, you step over the line of death, and you die to the present world for 3 days and 3 nights, right? So I took off all my clothes, so I'm standing there buck naked. I'd saged myself, I saged my clothes, I step in, and suddenly I just hear all this rattling and stuff coming through this hedge of these oaks, these scrub oaks that were not even 30 feet away from me. And this big black bear pops its head out. And here I am standing with a sage stick, completely naked, just like looking at this black bear. And I'm like, oh my God. And all of these words started coming out of my mouth. And I had no idea where they came from. They weren't a language that I'd ever spoken before. It was just like, blah. And it wasn't a fear. It was nothing. It was just like, ooh, all these words. And the bear just kind of looked at me and then just kind of like huffed and then turned to the side and wandered up the hill. And it's like, these kinds of experiences with nature are things that I think when you're out in that sit spot is a very, controlled version of that. But that's where I think too, your intuition just starts to take over and you don't try to control it.
Right. Just let it come
Love
through.
it.
Yeah, no, other than just, if you're interested in what I'm talking about, herbalmedics.academy or thehumanpath.org or thehumanpath.net, really just herbalmedics.academy. That's where everything kind of flows to from there.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you both.
It was.